There was a Tcharn Court senior standing at the human height counter of Rosa Okafor's registry hall, which was wrong in the specific way that a tide standing up out of the sea and walking inland would be wrong, and Rosa knew before she crossed the floor that it had come for her. Court seniors did not come to annexes. The annex went to them, in filings and cross-readable notes in the slow upward crawl of the record wall. The senior tier spoke in the diplomatic chambers and let the working tier carry the paper. This one had folded its more than 2-meter height down to read a human height docket display, and the whole busy quiet hall had arranged itself around the fact of it without anyone deciding to. She had been having the worst week of her posting before she saw it, and now she understood that the week was not over. The week's trouble had a docket number. 3 days ago, the Accord had stopped trying to strike her recognition procedure one filing at a time. They had tried that twice, in the Civac matter, in the Aru matter, and lost both, because Clause 4 does not let a registry strike a true thing for being true, and had instead put down something Rosa had no answer for at all, a standing motion, a body-level rule change moving through the Accord's own legislative track to bar the recognition procedure prospectively, not to unmake the graves already filed, to make sure no one ever filed another. She had spent 3 days on it and gotten nowhere, because there was nowhere to get. Her supervisor had been blunt about it on the morning comm, in the flat voice he used when he had already decided a thing was lost, and wanted her to stop spending herself on it.
Rosa, Clause 4 protects what you filed. It protects the graves. It does not protect the method. The Accord can't call your procedure false, so they're going to make it illegal to use going forward by vote. And there is no reach rule and no clause of mine that stops the Accord from legislating its own registry. We don't get a vote. You built a door. They're allowed to wall up the doorway.
The graves already filed stay.
The graves stay. The road closes. Take the win you have, officer. It's a real one. Don't lose it reaching for the one you can't.
She had not argued because he was right about the rule. A reach administrative procedure lived on reach authority, cross-read into the Accord registry by treaty. The Accord could simply legislate that it would no longer read it. There was no reach instrument that reached up into Accord law and held a door open against the Accord's own will. She had written that sentence in her notebook, the worn one she kept in her uniform pocket because she did not trust her interface to be private around the Sewell. And she had underlined the part that hurt. No reach instrument reaches up into Accord law. She had been reading it again, walking back into the hall, when she looked up and there was the senior. She crossed the floor. Up close, the senior was older than any Tcharn she had ever briefed. The copper at its folds was not the single working band Vorm wore, but a dense accumulation, layer on layer, the kind of thing that took 1,000 years to gather. A deep Accord gray drape fell from its left shoulder, worked through with thread of the same old copper. At its throat fold there was a single record stylus, also copper, also old, and Rosa had read enough Tcharn protocol to know what a record stylus at the throat of a senior meant, even if she had never expected to stand close enough to one to see it. The senior straightened, unfolding to its full height, and turned its forward eye on her, while the two recessed side eyes went on watching the room.
Officer Okafor.
A pause. A real Tcharn pause. The kind that was not silence to the one making it, long enough that a junior officer's whole training screamed at her to fill it, and she had learned 2 years ago not to.
Rosa.
The given name, in a public chamber, the same construction Vorm had used 6 times in 4 years, Officer Okafor Rosa, the formal name, and then the bare one, and which Rosa had carried unanswered for 2 years because the first time anyone had ever done it to her had been a court senior in a public chamber, before she even had the standing to ask what it meant. She looked at the dense old copper in the record stylus and understood, with a slow, cold drop in her stomach, that she was looking at the first time, that this was the senior, the originator, the one Vorm had only ever been following.
You named me.
I named you 2 years ago in the chamber. The court has watched the name stand ever since. A name entered in error is struck within the hour. Yours has stood 2 years. You were told this. You were not told why.
Rosa's training told her to take this to a recess gallery, off the open floor, out of the record walls reading. She said so. The senior inclined its whole upper body, the Tcharn gesture of assent, and Rosa walked it to the quiet tiered alcoves off the far end of the hall. The recess galleries, built tall enough for a Tcharn to stand at rest, where parties waited out the long pauses of a court procedure. In the recess gallery, the senior settled into the tall rest posture, the draped folds composing themselves, and was quiet for a long time. Rosa waited. She had learned that the waiting was not a test of patience. It was the Tcharn composing, at the cadence of a nervous system that ran on a scale of centuries, and to interrupt it was to be the human who fidgeted.
The court carries a debt. It is the oldest thing the court carries, older than the accord, and it is the worst. When the vast homeworld died, the accord had procedures for what could be done, and it followed them. And the procedures said that nothing could be done in time, and so nothing was. The court did not fail to act. It is worse than that. The court acted correctly by its own law, and a world died, and the law was the thing that let it happen cleanly.
Rosa stood very still, and this was not briefing material. No Tcharn said this. The predecessor's question was closed. The vast grievance was a thing one managed, and the court's grief over it was a thing Rosa had read described in 3 lines of a history file as institutional and long-standing, and had never once heard a Tcharn name aloud.
For longer than your species has had ships, the court has wished to make a door, a way for a people the accord recorded as property, as wreck, as salvage, as recoverable mass, to stand instead as the dispossessed dead they are. The court has wished this, and the court has not done it. Do you understand why the court could not simply do it?
No.
The honesty of it seemed to please the senior, or at least it inclined its body a degree.
Because the court moves by precedent. It is the whole of what the court is. The court may enter a thing into its record only by citing a thing already in its record. To make the door, the court would have had to name a whole people into standing where no people of that kind had ever been named before, to act with no precedent to cite, on nothing but its own will. That is the one act the court forbids itself. An institution that can name peoples into being on its own will alone is not a court. It is a throne. We made ourselves a court a very long time ago, precisely so that we could never again be a throne. And so the door we most wished to make was the one door our own nature would not let us build.
Rosa felt the shape of it arriving before she had the words for it, the way she sometimes felt a clause resolve a sentence before she reached the end of the line.
So the court did the only thing a court may do. It waited for a precedent. It could not make one. It could only hope one would be made by someone outside the court, someone not bound by our nature, someone reckless enough to build a doorway out of a courtesy and call it law before anyone told them they were not allowed to. The court has watched your species since you arrived and seen you do this again and again. You take a thing we made to mean one small thing, and you make it mean a large thing. And you do it before you've asked permission, because it does not occur to you to ask. We found this alarming, and then very quietly, over a long time, we began to hope for it. I named you Rosa, by the grammar of our own naming, the grammar by which to name a party in a note for record is to enter that party into standing. I named you into our record as a party, not because of anything you had yet done, because I judged that you, of all the human juniors the court watched, were the one most likely to take a name you did not understand and refuse to leave it alone. The name was the seed. The question beneath it, the one no Tcharn would answer for you, because no Tcharn could, was only this: what will you grow from it? And you grew the door.
2 years of carrying the name and not knowing, and here was the knowing, and it was so much heavier than the not knowing had been. She had thought, on the bad days, that the naming might have been an insult she was too junior to feel. She had thought, on the worst days, that it might have been a mistake nobody would admit to. She had never once thought it was a 1,000-year-old institution choosing her, by name, as the hand it could not use itself.
You let me think it might be nothing for 2 years.
If I had told you what you were for, you would have built the door I wanted, instead of the door you found. A seeded thing grows wrong if it is told what to be. I needed to learn what you would make, not watch you make what I asked. That, too, is the difference between a court and a throne.
And then Rosa understood why it had come. Not to confess, not to apologize. A court senior did not travel to a reach annex to make a slight human officer feel chosen. It had come because the door was about to be walled up, and the seed it had spent 2 years growing was about to be wasted. And the only thing in the galaxy that could stop that was a thing only the court could do, and only now that the precedent existed. She took the notebook out. She did not open it for the senior to read. She opened it for herself, to the underlined line. No reach instrument reaches up into accord law. She had written it as the wall she could not get over, and now she read it again with the senior's words behind it, and saw that she had been right about the wall and wrong about the question. She had spent 3 days asking how a reach instrument could survive accord law. That was the wrong question, because it could not and never would. And Reyes was right. The right question was the one the senior had just walked across a sector to put in front of her without saying it, because a court could not say it. The seed had to grow itself the rest of the way. The door did not have to be a reach instrument. The standing the door conferred, the thing the accord wanted to legislate away, Rosa had built out of a reach section 400.7 procedure, cross-read into the accord registry. But the standing had never really come from the reach. The first time she had ever won a standing fight, in the Tesseville matter, she had not won it on reach authority at all. She had won it because the Tcharn naming had entered her as a party of accord record, standing that lived in the court's own grammar, not in any reach clause. She had used that once for herself, and then spent 2 years building everyone else a reach-shaped door because the reach was the only authority she thought she had. She looked up.
The Accord can legislate away a reach procedure. It can vote to stop reading my Section 412.7 filings tomorrow, but it cannot legislate away the court's naming grammar. That isn't Accord law. It's older than the Accord. It's yours. If the standing the door confers came from the naming grammar instead of from my clause, if the dispossessed were entered the way you entered me, by name of record on the court's own authority, then the Accord can't strike it because it isn't theirs to strike. They can't vote down a thing that isn't Accord legislation. They'd have to vote down the court itself.
The senior was still for a long, full-weight pause. When it spoke again, its register had changed. Not warmer. The Tcharn did not do warm, but lower. The way a very old thing speaks when a young thing has finally said the sentence it crossed a sector to hear.
The court cannot name a whole people into standing with no precedent. We have said, but the court may ratify a precedent that already exists, made by a party of the court's own record, and enter it into the naming grammar as a thing now cited, a thing now ours. You are a party of our record, Rosa. You made the door. If the court ratifies your door, under the grammar that named you, the door becomes a Tcharn procedural law, grown from a precedent the court did not make but may now cite. And what the court holds in its own grammar, the accord cannot legislate away. It can only refuse to be the court, which it will not do, because the day it does, it is a throne again, and every other people it governs will see it.
It was, Rosa thought, a perfect machine. The court could not build the door. It could plant a seed that might become a precedent, and then it could ratify the precedent it had not built and call the whole thing legitimate because every step of it cited a step already in the record. The naming cited the grammar. The door cited the naming. The ratification cited the door. Nowhere had the court acted on naked will. It had only ever cited, and the one piece of naked will the whole structure required, the reckless, unpermitted, courtesy into law act that no court could ever perform, had been done by a junior reach officer who hadn't known she wasn't allowed to. She had been the throne the court could not be, for one act, on purpose, because they'd needed someone who would.
You need me to ask. You can ratify a precedent made by a party of your record, but you can't reach down and take it. The party has to bring it to the grammar. That's why you came in person. You can't make the door. You can't even ask for it. I have to ask you to ratify it.
The seed cannot be made to flower by the one who planted it. It must reach toward the light on its own, or it is not the thing we needed. Yes, Rosa, you have to ask. I crossed a sector to be standing here when you did, and not one step sooner because the asking is the last part of the precedent. And it has to be yours.
And there it was, the moment her whole posting had been built to make her flinch from. Not like that one. She had been given this job with the unspoken warning hanging over it, the predecessor reassigned for improvising at the wrong moment, the institution watching to see whether she would be the careful one or the reckless one. She had spent 2 years being careful in public and reckless only when the careful path ran out, and telling herself that was discipline. And now a 1,000-year-old court had told her, in the politest possible terms, that it had chosen her precisely because it had judged she would, in the end, be the reckless one. That the recklessness her own people distrusted was the exact thing the oldest institution in the galaxy had been unable to manufacture in itself and had gone looking for in hers. She thought about Hari, who broke value on purpose and called it the only honest move on the board. She thought about her predecessor, whose name she had never been told, who had improvised at the wrong moment and been quietly disappeared from the record for it, and who had, maybe, improvised at the wrong moment for the right reason, the way she now had, twice, 3 times, more. She thought about every contractor and tender and broker and fixer out in the dark who had ever taken a thing built to mean one small thing and made it mean a large one, because the large meaning was needed and no one had given them permission. The courage to do this was not hers, it was theirs. She was only the one standing in the room where it had to be spent.
Then I'm asking, senior of the court, I ask the court to ratify the recognition procedure as precedent under the naming grammar. The door I built for the Vask of Marach hold and Sevak hold and the Oru and the people in the 5th script I still can't read, and every people the accord ever wrote down as property and may yet. Enter it into your record the way you entered me. Make it yours so it can never again be only mine and never be theirs to close.
The senior brought its forward eye fully to bear on her, and the 2 recessed side eyes which the whole time she had known it had been watching the room, the threshold, the far hall, turned inward too, all 3, the entire regard of a court senior on one slight human officer, which she suspected very few humans had ever been given, and lived their ordinary life afterward.
The court hears the asking. The court finds the precedent valid, made by a party of its record. The court ratifies.
It reached up with one 3-fingered hand, the inner thumb articulating from beneath the wrist, and took the record stylus from its throat fold. Rosa had read that a senior's record stylus was the mark of naming authority, the instrument by which the court entered a thing into its own record on the court's own grammar. She had never read what it looked like to be used because no human had ever been close enough to write it down. Old copper, worn smooth at the grip by a span of use she could not imagine. It did not glow or hum. It was just a tool, the oldest tool in the room, in the hands of the oldest thing in the room, doing the one thing only it could do. The senior held the stylus for a long, composing pause, and then it spoke the entry, the recognition procedure, named into the naming grammar by name of record on the court's authority, and as it spoke, it moved the stylus, and Rosa understood she was watching a precedent enter the court's record the way her own name had entered it 2 years ago, in a chamber she had not understood she was being changed inside of. When it was done, it returned the stylus to the throat fold and was quiet, and Rosa was quiet, and the alcove held the two of them and the new permanent thing they had just made between them.
It is entered. The accord will see it on the record wall within the hour, in the court's own script, cited to the grammar that named you. They will move to strike it as they move to strike your filings, and they will find there is nothing to strike. It is not their legislation, it is ours, grown from a precedent we may cite, and they may not unmake. They will be very angry, Rosa. They will understand correctly that the court has done a thing it could never have done alone, and that a human did the part the court could not. Some of them will understand that this is what humans are for. That will frighten them more than the door.
And me, they're going to understand it was me.
Yes, you were already the most interesting junior officer in the sector. You are now something the Accord has no word for in any of its 4 scripts. I am sorry for it. It is the cost of being the hand a court cannot be. I chose you for it knowing it would cost you. That is the part I will carry.
They walked back out toward the hall together. At the threshold of the recess gallery, where the deep alcove light gave way to the bright civic key of the registry floor, the senior paused and Rosa paused with it, and they both looked down the length of the hall to the record wall, where the 4-script glyph crawl rose and rose, and where, within the hour the senior had said, a 5th thing would appear in a script none of the 4 working peoples could read, the court's own, citing a grammar older than the Accord, and there would be nothing anyone could do to take it down.
Can I ask you something that isn't procedure?
You may ask, I may decline. That too is procedure.
Where did you think I'd get the nerve to build a door nobody gave me permission to build? You said you chose me because you judged I would, but you can't have known I didn't know. So where did you think it would come from?
The senior took its time, the longest pause yet, the kind Rosa had spent 2 years learning not to step on, and she did not step on it now, even though everything in her wanted the answer.
There is a thing your species does that the court studied for a long time before it understood it. You act on a courage you do not yet have. You borrow it from the ones who acted before you, from the ones you hope will act after, from people you will never meet, who once took a small thing and made it large and were not struck down for it. You spend courage you have not earned and cannot repay against a debt you trust someone, somewhere, will make good. We have no word for it that is not also our word for recklessness. I think the truest name for it is borrowed courage. I did not know where you would get the nerve, Rosa. I only knew your people never get it from themselves. They get it from each other. Across distances and across time. On credit. I chose you. because I judged you would find the credit when you needed it, and you did. You are standing in it now.
The senior left the way, a tide goes out, unhurried, the whole hall rearranging itself around the fact of its leaving the way it had around its arrival. Rosa stood at the threshold for a while after it was gone. Down the hall, the record wall scrolled, 4 scripts climbing, and she watched it the way she watched everything, waiting for the 5th. She took out the notebook. She found the underlined line. No reach instrument reaches up into a chord law, and she did not cross it out because it was still true, and being true was the whole point. Clause 4 had taught her that much. Under it, she wrote a second line, in the precise hand she used for the things she would reread later. Correct. So I didn't use a reach instrument. I borrowed an older one, and I borrowed the nerve to ask for it. She put the notebook away. Reyes would have to be told and would be unhappy, and would also, she thought, be quietly, professionally amazed, in the way he was amazed by the things he had told her not to do right before they worked. The Accord would see the entry within the hour. Somewhere out in the dark, a vast trade clade that had traveled 3 times to stand by one grave would learn that the road they had been allowed to walk had been made into stone. No one could pull up. Somewhere a people in a 5th script she still couldn't read would file and clear and hold. And the courage for all of it would keep moving the way it always had, hand to hand on credit against a debt none of them could pay alone, and all of them, together, always did. The 5th script reached the top of the wall and kept climbing in the court's own hand, where no Accord vote could ever reach it. Rosa Okafor watched it go, and then she went back to her desk because there were filings and a supervisor to brief, and a road now open that someone had to keep tending. And that too she would borrow the nerve for, the way she always had, the way her whole reckless borrowing species always did. She had asked officially. The court had answered. The door was stone. She got back to work.